In the world of the ultra-rich, divorce isn't just a breakup. It's a war. And in the billion-dollar war between Richard and Celine Thompson, the battle was set to be legendary. He was the charismatic tech mogul. She was the elegant, intelligent wife who helped build his empire. But when a brazen affair with a younger associate came to light, the stage was set for a brutal courtroom showdown. Then, just 48 hours before the trial that would decide everything, Celine Thompson vanished without a trace. The world watched as her husband claimed victory, his mistress smiling by his side. They thought they had won. They didn't know that Celine's disappearance wasn't an act of defeat. It was the first move in a game they never knew they were playing, and the FBI was about to deliver the checkmate. The air in the Thompsons' Southampton estate always smelled of money. A crisp, clean fusion of salty sea breeze from the Atlantic, the manicured sweetness of prize-winning hydrangeas, and the faint, sterile scent of Windex on glass that stretched 2 stories high. It was a beautiful prison, and Celine Martin Thompson had long ago forgotten what freedom felt like. For 15 years, she had been Mrs. Richard Thompson, a role she had performed with the same meticulous grace she applied to everything. She was the perfect hostess, the silent partner, the elegant accessory on the arm of a man whose ambition was as vast and voracious as the ocean their mansion overlooked. Richard "Rick" Thompson wasn't just a husband. He was a phenomenon. The founder of Thompson Innovations, a titan of the fintech world, he was lauded by the press as a visionary, a man who could see the future and bend it to his will. He had a smile that could disarm senators, and a voice that, when lowered, could make even the most hardened venture capitalist feel like a trusted friend. To the outside world, they were a power couple. Rick's raw, predatory charisma was perfectly balanced by Celine's quiet, aristocratic poise. She was old money, from a Boston family, the Martins, whose name was etched onto university libraries and hospital wings. Her inheritance had been the seed capital for Rick's first major venture. He never let her forget that though he framed it not as a debt, but as his genius in recognizing the potential in her stagnant family wealth. But inside the glass house, the air was thick with unspoken rules and silent rebukes. Rick's love was conditional, a reward for her compliance. Her opinions were interesting, but his were decisive. Her social circles were quaint, but his were essential. He had over the years expertly and systematically isolated her, not with bars and locks, but with praise that was actually criticism, and a generosity that was a form of control. He bought her a stable of horses she never had time to ride, and a collection of first-edition novels he scoffed at as dusty relics. They were gifts not for her, but for the image of the man who could afford to give them. The final crack in the facade wasn't a singular dramatic event, but a slow, creeping poison. Its name was Isabella Rossi. Isabella was everything Celine was not. Young, raven-haired, and burning with a fierce, undisguised ambition that Rick found intoxicating. She had joined Thompson Innovations 3 years prior, fresh from a top business school, and had clawed her way up to become his junior vice president of strategy. She didn't just admire Rick, she mirrored him. She adopted his aggressive negotiation tactics, his ruthless efficiency, and his belief that sentiment was a weakness to be exploited. Celine first saw them together, not in a clandestine embrace, but across a boardroom table. Rick was presenting a new acquisition strategy, and Isabella was at his side, finishing his sentences, anticipating his needs, looking at him with a predatory gleam that Celine recognized because she saw it in her husband's eyes every day. It was the look of a conqueror. The clues after that were impossible to ignore. The late nights at the office that stretched into early mornings. The scent of a cloying, unfamiliar perfume, J'adore Celine noted with a detached bitterness clinging to his suits. The second phone, the work phone, that was perpetually swanced and angled away from her. Celine wasn't a fool. She was a martyr. Her mind, which Rick had so often dismissed as being more suited to garden parties than boardrooms, was sharp and analytical. She didn't confront him. A confrontation would be a messy, emotional affair, and Rick thrived on emotional chaos. He would twist her words, gaslight her, call her hysterical, and then with a placating smile buy her a diamond bracelet to apologize for her misunderstanding. Instead, she began to watch. She became a ghost in her own home, observing, documenting. She started with the family finances. For years she had ceded control to Rick and his army of accountants, content with her generous allowance. Now she reclaimed her access. Using the login credentials she had been given at the beginning of their marriage credentials, Rick had likely forgotten existed. She delved into the labyrinthine network of accounts, shell corporations, and offshore entities that constituted the Thompson family wealth. What she found was far worse than infidelity. Rick wasn't just cheating on her. He was cheating the world. Tucked away in a Cayman Islands entity named Project Nightingale, she found evidence of systematic financial fraud. He was using inflated revenue projections and ghost assets to defraud investors, artificially pumping up the stock price of Thompson Innovations before major funding rounds. He was laundering money through a complex web of transactions that were designed to be utterly untraceable. But Celine traced them. For 6 months, she spent her nights not in their shared king-sized bed, but in the cold blue light of her tablet mapping out the flow of illicit money. She learned the language of forensic accounting, cross-referencing dates of secret wire transfers with Isabella's travel schedule. A trip to Zurich for a banking conference for Isabella coincided with a multi-million-dollar transfer to a dormant account. A team-building retreat in the Bahamas aligned perfectly with the establishment of a new shell company. Isabella wasn't just the other woman. She was a willing, active participant in his crimes. The final piece of proof came on a Tuesday in October. Rick was in Tokyo. Isabella was supposedly in London. But Celine, paying for a premium satellite tracking service, knew Rick's private jet had made an unscheduled 2-hour stop in London before continuing to Japan. That evening, Isabella posted a picture on a private social media account she thought Celine didn't know about. She was laughing in a hotel room, a glass of champagne in her hand. In the reflection of the champagne bucket behind her, faint but unmistakable, was the silhouette of a man wearing the custom Patek Philippe watch Celine had given Rick for their 10th anniversary. The caption read, "To the future, hashed unstoppable, hashed Queen takes King." Celine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. It was the icy certainty of betrayal, but also the fire of resolve. They saw her as a relic, a placeholder, a problem to be managed until she could be discarded. They had fatally underestimated her. The next morning, she did not call Rick. She did not call a divorce lawyer. She called Catherine Kate Martin, her younger sister, a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. "Kate," Celine said, her voice devoid of emotion, "I need your advice. Not as my sister, but as a prosecutor. I think my husband has been running a criminal enterprise, and I have the proof." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then Kate's voice, sharp and focused. "Celine, what have you found?" Celine began to talk, and as she detailed the accounts, the dates and the names, she felt the last 15 years of fog begin to lift. The gilded cage was about to be blown wide open. The war had begun. Filing for divorce was like pulling the pin on a grenade. The explosion was instantaneous and devastating. Rick, blindsided and furious, reacted with the full force of his considerable power. The man who had charmed the world now turned that same energy into a campaign of personal destruction aimed squarely at his wife. He hired Arthur Sterling, a pit bull of a divorce attorney, known for his scorched earth tactics and his cozy relationship with the city's most ruthless gossip columnists. Within a week, the narrative was set. Celine was portrayed as a bitter, unstable woman, scorned and seeking to destroy the man who had given her a life of luxury. Anonymous sources, clearly fed by Rick's camp, spoke of her erratic behavior, her reclusiveness, and her jealous fantasies. Her quiet dignity was reframed as coldness, her intelligence as manipulative cunning. Celine, guided by Kate, had retained Margaret Atwood, a lawyer whose calm demeanor masked a brilliant legal mind. Margaret was the antithesis of Arthur Sterling. She was methodical, precise, and utterly unflappable. "He's trying to provoke you, Celine," Margaret said during one of their first meetings in her understated book-lined office. "He wants you to get emotional, to lash out, to prove his narrative right. We will not give him the satisfaction. We will respond only with facts." And the facts were on their side. Celine had meticulously copied every file from Project Nightingale onto an encrypted hard drive. The evidence of financial fraud was ironclad. Margaret's strategy was simple: leverage the criminal evidence in the civil divorce proceeding to force an equitable settlement. Thompson Innovations, built with Celine's seed money and inflated by Rick's fraud, was marital property. She was entitled to half. The initial settlement offer from Rick's team was an insult. A one-time payment of $10 million, a gag order, and she would have to vacate the Southampton and New York properties within 30 days. "They're laughing at us," Celine said, her hands clenched. "Let them," Margaret replied coolly. "Hubris is the first crack in any man's armor." Meanwhile, Isabella Rossi stepped out of the shadows and into the spotlight. She was a constant presence at Rick's side, a walking, smiling symbol of his victory. She was photographed with him at charity galas, her hand possessively on his arm. She moved her things into the Manhattan penthouse, her vibrant modern art replacing Celine's muted landscapes. She began wearing pieces of jewelry Rick had given Celine, a power play so brazen it was breathtaking. One afternoon, Celine had to return to the penthouse with a court order to retrieve some personal belongings. Isabella was there, lounging on the custom-made sofa, as if she had been born to it. She was wearing a simple silk blouse, but on her wrist was a Cartier love bracelet, the one Rick had given Celine on their 5th anniversary. "Can I help you?" Isabella asked, her voice dripping with false concern. "Rick's not here. He's busy running the company." "I'm aware," Celine said, her voice even. "I'm here for my mother's letters and my personal effects." Isabella smirked. "Of course. Take what you need. We're planning a little redecoration soon anyway. Getting rid of some of the older things. A fresh start, you know." Celine ignored her, her gaze sweeping over the woman who had so eagerly helped dismantle her life. Isabella was so confident, so sure of her place in this new world Rick was building on the ashes of his marriage. She saw Celine as a ghost, a remnant of a past already being erased. It was exactly what Celine needed her to believe. While the legal battle raged in the open, Celine was fighting a second secret war. On her sister Kate's advice, She did not immediately take the financial crimes evidence to the authorities. "Rick has judges and politicians in his pocket," Kate had warned her. "If he gets wind of a federal investigation, he'll bury the evidence, intimidate witnesses, and use every trick in the book to kill it before it starts. The timing has to be perfect. You have one shot at this." So Celine made another call. This one was to a man named Julian Croft. A former military intelligence officer, Croft now ran a boutique private investigations firm. He was discreet, expensive, and ruthlessly effective. He specialized in finding things people didn't want found. They met in a nondescript coffee shop in Brooklyn. Croft was a compact man in his late 40s, with watchful, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Celine, dressed down in jeans and a simple sweater, laid out her request. "I don't need you to find dirt on my husband's affair." She began pushing a file across the table. "I have plenty of that. I need you to understand his criminal enterprise. The file contains everything I've found on Project Nightingale. I believe this is just the tip of the iceberg. I need the rest of the iceberg." Croft listened intently, his expression unchanging as she spoke. He opened the file and scanned the first few pages, his eyes sharp. "This is thorough," he said, a note of respect in his voice. "What's your objective?" "My sister is a prosecutor," Celine stated. "The objective is a non-prosecution agreement for me, in exchange for testimony that will lead to a conviction for him. To get that, the case I bring them needs to be not just strong, but undeniable. I need you to find the missing pieces, the specific government officials he has bribed, the other investors he has defrauded, and most importantly, the exact location of the primary servers that hold the unadulterated data. He'll have layers of security firewalls, data havens in countries with no extradition treaties," Croft warned. "I know," Celine said, "but he has a weakness. Two, actually. His arrogance is the first. The second is Isabella Rossi." A plan began to form, audacious and terrifying in its complexity. It was a plan that required Celine to do more than just fight back. It required her to disappear. It required her to cede the field of battle entirely, to let her enemies believe they had won. Julian Croft began his work. He was a phantom, using his network of contacts and his mastery of digital and human intelligence to slip past Rick's defenses. He put a tail on Isabella not to prove the affair, but to track her movements as a co-conspirator. He planted a listening device not in Rick's office, which would be swept daily, but in the back of the Maybach that shuttled Isabella between her apartment and the office. The information started to trickle in. Names of bribed SEC officials, details of a consulting fee paid to a Cayman account belonging to a key senator's chief of staff, and most critically, chatter picked up from Isabella's car. She was complaining to a friend on the phone about Rick's paranoia, mentioning his insistence on using a proprietary closed-loop server housed in a private data facility in Delaware for all sensitive Project Nightingale communications. She even named the facility Aegis Secure Data. It was the smoking gun. As Julian dug deeper, the divorce proceedings grew more acrimonious. Arthur Sterling filed motion after motion, burying Margaret's team in paperwork. They subpoenaed Celine's friends, her family, even her personal trainer, searching for any scrap of information to use against her. The trial date was set for December the 10th. Rick was confident. He believed Celine's case rested on proving his infidelity had harmed the value of the company, a difficult argument to win. He had no idea she knew about Project Nightingale. He thought he was fighting a divorce case. He had no idea Celine was preparing for a federal prosecution. In late November, with the trial less than 2 weeks away, Celine met with Julian Croft one last time. He handed her a new passport, a driver's license, and a credit card under the name Caroline May. He also gave her a burner phone and a small encrypted thumb drive. "It's all there," Croft said. The Aegis facility schematics access codes gleaned from an obliging night shift technician and a full profile of the data structure on their servers. This plus what you already have is more than enough to burn him to the ground. Celine took the drive. Her hand was trembling slightly. "He'll come after me, Julian. When he realizes." "He'll have bigger problems," Croft assured her. "The plan is in motion. My team will handle the data extraction from Aegis the moment you give the signal. Once the package is delivered to your sister, you need to be a ghost." The signal. It was the linchpin of the entire plan. The day before she vanished, Celine did something that would later be scrutinized endlessly by the media. She went to her bank and withdrew $100,000 in cash from a personal account her father had left her, an account Rick knew nothing about. Then she met with her sister, Kate, for lunch. They spoke of childhood memories of summers on Martha's Vineyard, of anything but the impending storm. As they parted, Celine hugged her sister tightly. "I'll see you on the other side of this, Kate," she whispered. "You be careful, Elle. You call me the second you're clear." That night in the sterile, temporary apartment she had been living in, Celine wrote a single cryptic note, folded it, and left it on the kitchen counter. It read, "I can't do this anymore." At 3:00 a.m. on December 8th, exactly 48 hours before the trial was set to begin, Celine Thompson walked out of her apartment with a single suitcase, got into a waiting car, driven by one of Julian Croft's associates, and disappeared into the night. The disappearance of Celine Thompson was a media firestorm. A high-profile billionaire's wife vanishing on the eve of a contentious divorce trial was the kind of story that tabloid headlines were made for. The narrative that Rick and his lawyer Arthur Sterling had so carefully crafted now became the accepted truth. "Wife flees ahead of courtroom defeat," screamed the New York Post. "Mental breakdown. Celine Thompson abandons billion-dollar claim," speculated a cable news chyron. Rick played his part to perfection. He issued a public statement, his face a mask of weary concern. "I am deeply worried about Celine's well-being," he said, his voice grave. "Her behavior has become increasingly erratic over the past few months. I believe the pressure of the divorce has been too much for her. My only hope is that she is safe and that she seeks the help she so desperately needs." Arthur Sterling was more direct. "Ms. Thompson's disappearance is a clear admission that her case had no merit," he told reporters on the courthouse steps. "She has abandoned her claim. We will be filing a motion for dismissal with prejudice." Isabella Rossi once again played the role of the supportive, steadfast partner. She stood quietly by Rick's side during his press conference, her hand on his back, her expression a perfect blend of concern for Celine and adoration for Rick. Privately, she was ecstatic. "She ran," Isabella said, pacing the length of the Southampton mansion's living room, a glass of champagne already in her hand. "She actually ran. She knew she was going to lose Rick. She knew she couldn't stand against you." Rick watched her, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across his face. "She was always weaker than she looked, Izzy. All that old money poise is just a cover for a profound lack of nerve. She never had the stomach for a real fight." The disappearance had thrown Margaret Atwood's legal strategy into chaos. She was blindsided. Celine had given her no warning. She was forced to request a continuance which the judge reluctantly granted, but the damage was done. Her client was a fugitive from her own lawsuit. The note Celine had left behind, "I can't do this anymore," was leaked to the press, cementing the idea that she had suffered a breakdown and fled. While the world speculated Celine, now Caroline May, was 1,000 miles away. The car had taken her to a small private airfield in New Jersey, where a chartered plane was waiting. She landed in a quiet town in rural Montana, a place of vast skies and rugged mountains, the polar opposite of the claustrophobic opulence she had left behind. Julian Croft had arranged a long-term rental for her, a small isolated cabin with a satellite internet connection and a panoramic view of the Absaroka Range. It was from this cabin that she watched the world react to her vanishing act. It was painful. She watched as her character was assassinated, as her motives were twisted, as the man who had systematically abused and betrayed her was painted as a long-suffering victim. She saw Isabella being interviewed by a sycophantic journalist, talking about her vision for the future of Thompson Innovations and the importance of loyalty and forward momentum. But every pang of anger was tempered by the knowledge that this was a necessary part of the plan. Their arrogance was her greatest asset. Their celebration was the perfect cover for the real storm that was gathering. On her second day in Montana, she sent a single encrypted email to Julian Croft. The subject line was, "Signal Green." That was all he needed. Miles away in Wilmington, Delaware, a member of Croft's team, a young woman with prodigious hacking skills, used the access codes and network information Croft had procured. She bypassed the formidable firewalls of Aegis-secured data, slipping past their digital sentries like a whisper. She didn't trigger a single alarm. Once inside, she located the closed-loop server dedicated to Project Nightingale. She made a perfect bit-for-bit copy of the entire server's contents, every email, every ledger, every backdated contract, and falsified invoice, every chat log between Rick and Isabella, discussing the transfer of illicit funds. The data was siphoned out, routed through a dozen proxy servers from Estonia to Brazil, and finally landed on a secure server controlled by Croft. The entire operation took less than 20 minutes. Back in her cabin, Celine received another encrypted email. Subject, package acquired. Now it was time for Phase 2. She opened a new email, this one addressed to her sister, Kate. She attached the massive data file Croft's team had extracted, along with her own detailed 50-page affidavit. Her affidavit was a masterpiece of cold, factual fury. It was a guided tour through Rick's criminal empire, explaining every transaction, every deception, every crime, with the chilling clarity of someone who had lived at the heart of it. She named the bribed officials the defrauded investors and detailed Isabella Rossi's specific involvement, complete with transaction codes she had personally authorized. She ended the affidavit with a simple, powerful statement. "I am prepared to offer my full and unreserved testimony in exchange for federal protection and immunity from prosecution for any tangential involvement the government might perceive I had as Richard Thompson's wife. This evidence, I believe, is more than sufficient to secure the convictions of all primary parties involved in Project Nightingale." She hit send. Now all she could do was wait. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York did not move quickly. They were methodical, cautious. A case of this magnitude against a figure as powerful as Richard Thompson had to be airtight. For weeks, Celine heard nothing. She lived a quiet, solitary life. She hiked in the mornings, the crisp mountain air, a balm after years of recycled, climate-controlled environments. She read the books Rick had called dusty relics. For the first time in 15 years, she felt the quiet return of her own self. Meanwhile, back in New York, Rick's victory seemed absolute. 2 months after Celine's disappearance, the Honourable Judge Michael O'Connell called the Thompson v. Thompson divorce case back into session. It was a formality. Margaret Atwood, without a client, had no choice but to stand before the court and admit she had been unable to make contact with Ms. Thompson. Arthur Sterling, smelling blood, was magnificent in his performance of magnanimous victory. "Your Honour," he began, his voice resonating through the hushed courtroom. "We take no pleasure in this. Mr. Thompson is, as you know, deeply concerned for his estranged wife. However, justice cannot be held hostage indefinitely. Ms. Thompson has, by her own actions, abandoned her petition. She has shown contempt for this court and for the process. We move for a full and final dismissal with prejudice." Margaret made a last-ditch effort. "Your Honour, we believe Ms. Thompson may have vanished under duress." "Duress?" Sterling scoffed. "The only duress she was under was the pressure of her own false claims collapsing around her. She left a note, for heaven's sake. She fled." The judge, a stern man with little patience for courtroom drama, looked at Margaret over his spectacles. "Miss Atwood, do you have any evidence of this duress? Any communication from your client? Any proof at all that she did not leave of her own free will?" "No, Your Honour, not at this time." "Then I have no choice." Judge O'Connell's gavel came down with a sharp, final crack. "The plaintiff having absented herself and abandoned her claim, this court grants the defendant's motion. The case is dismissed with prejudice. All assets and properties controlled by the defendant Richard Thompson shall remain his sole and separate property. This matter is concluded." A wave of relief washed over Rick's face. He turned to Arthur Sterling and clasped his shoulder, a picture of vindicated power. But the most telling reaction came from the front row of the gallery. Isabella Rossi, dressed in a sharp, blood-red power suit, had been watching the proceedings with the intensity of a hawk. As the gavel fell, her lips painted the same shade of red as her suit curled into a slow, triumphant smile. It was not a smile of relief, but of utter conquest. It was a smile that said, "I won. I took it all." She caught Rick's eye and gave him a subtle possessive nod. The Queen had taken the King, and the old Queen had been swept from the board. That night they held a celebration at Per Se, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, with panoramic views of Central Park. The table was filled with Rick's closest allies, bankers, lawyers, and board members who had stood by him. Champagne flowed. Toasts were made to Rick's resilience, to his genius, to the bright future of Thompson Innovations. Isabella was radiant, the undisputed star of the evening. She was no longer just the mistress or the ambitious VP. She was the victor, the woman who had stood by the king and now shared his throne. "I have to admit," Rick said, raising his glass to her, the city lights twinkling behind them, "I didn't think it would be this easy. I was prepared for a war." "She was never a warrior, Rick," Isabella said, touching his hand. Her diamonds glittered in the low light. "She was a museum piece, beautiful, valuable in her own way, but ultimately meant to be kept behind glass. You belong in the real world." "To the real world," Rick toasted, clinking his glass against hers. Later that week, the final legal papers were drawn up. Rick, feeling expansive and generous in his victory, decided to formalize Isabella's position. He wasn't just going to marry her. He was going to make her a true partner. His lawyers drafted an agreement that would grant her a significant block of stock options and a formal seat on the board of directors of Thompson Innovations. But he also wanted to give her a personal gift, something symbolic. He thought of Project Nightingale. It was his secret masterpiece, the engine of his true wealth. Bringing Isabella into that, even in a token way, would be the ultimate expression of trust. It would bind them together, not just in love and business, but in secrecy and power. His private wealth lawyers, the ones who handled his offshore interests, drafted a simple one-page document. It was a deed of gift. It transferred a single non-voting share of the Cayman Islands entity Nightingale Holdings, Loudest, to one Ms. Isabella Rossi. It was a meaningless share in terms of power, a drop in a vast ocean of assets. But its symbolism was immense. It was a key to the secret kingdom. He planned to give it to her that Friday, to kick off a celebratory weekend in the Hamptons. The Southampton estate, now fully and legally his, had been scrubbed of the last vestiges of Celine. Isabella's vibrant, aggressive modern art now hung where Celine's muted classics once had. On that Friday evening, Rick stood by the massive fireplace, a velvet box in his hand. Isabella descended the grand staircase, wearing a shimmering silver dress. She looked, he thought, like the future itself. A little something to celebrate our final victory, Rick said, opening the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was not jewelry, but a single ornate custom-made fountain pen, a Mont Blanc with her initials IR engraved in platinum. "It's beautiful, Rick," she said, slightly puzzled. "It's for signing," he said, producing the deed of gift with a flourish. "Welcome, my dear, to the inner circle." He explained what it was, a single share in his most private, most profitable venture, a symbol of their unbreakable partnership. Isabella's eyes lit up with understanding and naked ambition. This was more than a marriage proposal. This was an ascension. She took the pen, her hand steady, and scrawled her signature on the line. Isabella Rossi. Her acceptance of the gift. She smiled that triumphant smile again. "To us?" she said, raising an imaginary glass. "No one can touch us now." At that exact moment, the doorbell chimed. "I'm not expecting anyone," Rick said with a frown. His security detail would have handled any unannounced visitors at the main gate. The butler, a man who had served the Thompsons for a decade, appeared at the door to the living room, his face pale and flustered. "Mr. Thompson," he stammered, "there are some people here. They're from the FBI." The world seemed to slow down. The crackling of the fire in the hearth suddenly sounded deafening. Rick's smile froze, then evaporated. Isabella's triumphant expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "The FBI," Rick said, his voice dangerously low. "Here, are you certain?" Before the butler could answer, two men and a woman, in dark, impeccably tailored suits, stepped past him into the room. They moved with a quiet, unnerving economy of motion. They were not impressed by the soaring ceilings or the museum-quality art. Their eyes swept the room and settled on Rick and Isabella. The man in the lead, who had a sharp, intelligent face and wore the weary authority of his profession like a second skin, held up his credentials. "Richard Thompson, I'm Special Agent David Chen, with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is Agent Miller and Agent Davies. We have a warrant to search these premises." Rick, recovering his composure, slipped into the role he played best, the powerful man in charge. "A warrant on what grounds?" "This is harassment. I'll have my lawyer on the phone in 30 seconds. "You're free to do that, sir," Agent Chen said, his voice calm and unyielding. "The warrant covers all financial records, electronic devices and documents related to Thompson Innovations, and a list of affiliated entities, including one called Nightingale Holdings Limited." At the mention of Nightingale, a jolt went through Rick. It was a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw, but Chen saw it. Isabella's confusion sharpened into alarm. She looked at Rick, her eyes wide. While my team begins the search, Chen continued, his gaze shifting from Rick to Isabella. I have something I've been instructed to deliver to you personally, Ms. Rossi. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a crisp, sealed envelope. It was made of thick, high-quality linen paper, the kind of stationery Celine favored. But this wasn't from Celine. The return address was a corporate services firm in Wilmington, Delaware, and the addressee was printed in stark, clear type, Ms. Isabella Rossi. Isabella stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. For me, I don't understand. It's a letter in your name, ma'am, Chen said, his expression unreadable. It's pertinent to our investigation. I was asked to ensure you received it. Her hands trembling slightly, Isabella took the envelope. Rick watched her, his mind racing, trying to calculate angles to find the trap he knew must be there. What was this? Some desperate, pathetic parting shot from Celine. A forged document. Isabella tore it open. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a formal letter, printed on the letterhead of a company she had never heard of, Martin Strategic Solutions, LLC. The letter was brief and chillingly formal. Dear Ms. Rossi, pursuant to the Articles of Incorporation for Nightingale Holdings Limited, of which you are now a shareholder of record. Please find enclosed a copy of the corporate ledger for your review. As a partner in this entity, you share in all its assets, liabilities, and legal obligations. We trust you will find the records in order. Sincerely, the Managing Board. Martin Strategic Solutions, LLC. Isabella's blood ran cold. Shareholder of record. Partner. Her eyes darted to the gift deed she had signed not 5 minutes earlier, now sitting on the mahogany table like a time bomb. The second document was a thin ledger. It was a printout just a few pages long. The top of the first page read, Nightingale Holdings Limited. Summary of key transactions fiscal year 2024. What followed was a list. It was a simplified, brutally clear summary of the very crimes Celine had uncovered, but with new damning details Julian Croft's investigation had added. Transaction but 2024-041. Wire transfer of $2,500 to shell account linked to Senator Michael Corrigan's Chief of Staff. Purpose bribe to suppress SEC inquiry. Authorization R. Thompson Worse Rossi. Transaction number 2024. Creation of falsified revenue reports for Q2 investor call. Sign-off R. Thompson Worse Rossi. Transaction 2024-072. Transfer of funds from Nightingale Holdings to Aegis Secure Data for off-books server maintenance. Authorization I. Rossi. Her name was next to his. On everything, she looked up at Rick, her face a mask of dawning horror. Rick, what is this Martin Strategic Solutions? This is Celine, isn't it? Rick's face was ashen. He finally understood. This wasn't a desperate parting shot. This was a public execution. Celine hadn't run from the fight. She had retreated to build a guillotine. Agent Chen's voice cut through the stunned silence. Martin Strategic Solutions, LLC, is a new entity recently established by Ms. Celine Martin, he explained, as if lecturing a class. Several weeks ago, using her legal rights as a founding contributor to your marital assets, she undertook a complex corporate restructuring. It seems a key patent-holding subsidiary of Thomson Innovations, the one that holds the core algorithm for your fintech platform, was legally transferred into a new holding company. That holding company is in turn owned by Martin Strategic Solutions. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "And that new holding company," he said, gesturing to the papers in Isabella's hand, "is Nightingale Holdings Limited." The trap was sprung. The genius of it was breathtaking, diabolical. Celine hadn't just found the crime. She had taken control of the criminal entity itself. "The gift you just accepted, Ms. Rossi," Chen continued, his voice still unnervingly calm. "The one share Mr. Thompson so generously gave you wasn't a share in his secret slush fund. It was a share in her company, a company that now legally holds all the evidence of his and your crimes." Isabella felt the floor drop out from under her. The gift wasn't a key to the kingdom. It was an admission of guilt, a signed confession. By accepting the share, she had legally and formally tied herself to every crime committed by Nightingale Holdings. Celine hadn't needed to forge her signature on the authorizations. She had tricked Isabella into becoming a partner in the entire criminal enterprise after the fact. "And here's the most beautiful part," Chen said, a flicker of what might have been admiration in his eyes. Mr. Martin, as the majority shareholder of this entity, immediately filed for whistleblower status with the Department of Justice. She turned over a complete, unadulterated copy of the servers, the very servers you, Mr. Thompson, kept in Delaware. She gave us everything. Your entire criminal conspiracy delivered with a bow. He turned his full attention to Rick. "Richard Thompson, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud securities. Fraud and money laundering." He then looked at Isabella, whose face had crumpled in terror. "Isabella Rossi, you are under arrest for the same. You have the right to remain silent." As two agents stepped forward and placed Rick in handcuffs, all he could do was stare at Isabella, his face a maelstrom of rage and disbelief. He had been played, utterly and completely. He had handed his mistress the gun, and Celine had pulled the trigger. Isabella started to hyperventilate, the damning letter fluttering from her numb fingers to the expensive rug. The triumphant smile was gone, replaced by the stark, raw terror of someone whose perfect future has just been incinerated before her eyes. She looked around the magnificent room, her prize, and realized it was nothing more than a beautifully decorated crime scene. And she was now Exhibit A. The arrest of Richard Thompson and Isabella Rossi was not a quiet affair. It was a detonation that sent shrapnel flying through the highest echelons of New York's financial and social worlds. The story erupted across every news platform, a viral sensation of betrayal, greed, and stunning retribution. The narrative that had painted Celine as a fragile, fleeing spouse was shredded and rewritten in bold, sensational type. She was no longer the victim. She was the architect. News anchors spoke her name, Celine Martin, with a newfound awe, dissecting the genius of her long game. She was the ghost in the machine who had emerged to burn the machine to the ground. While the world feasted on the scandal, the protagonists of the drama were processed through the indifferent mechanics of federal justice. The cavernous, opulent spaces of their lives were replaced by the stark, sterile reality of fluorescent lights and polished concrete floors. Rick, simmering with a rage so profound it was almost silent, was separated from Isabella, who had collapsed into a state of hysterical, incoherent terror. His mind, usually a whirlwind of calculations and strategies, was stuck on a single repeating loop, the image of Celine's handwriting on old birthday cards. The quiet intelligence in her eyes, he had so often dismissed, the chilling realization that the woman he had deemed a museum piece had built him a cage and patiently waited for him to walk into it. The interrogation rooms were designed to strip away power. Isabella's was a small, featureless box, faced with two impassive FBI agents and a court-appointed lawyer who looked at her with weary pity. Her carefully constructed persona of a ruthless corporate climber disintegrated. At first, she tried to be cunning to spin a narrative. "I was influenced," she began, her voice trembling. "Rick is a very powerful, very persuasive man. I loved him. I would have done anything for him." Agent Miller, a woman with zero patience for theatrics, slid a printed transcript across the metal table. It was one of the chat logs from the Aegis server. "Is this you, Ms. Rossi, on March 12th? Already on it. I'll cook up some new projections for our European division. No one ever checks those." Does that sound like a woman who was merely influenced? Isabella stared at her own words, the casual criminality of them laid bare. The dam of her denial broke. She started talking, then sobbing, the words tumbling out in a desperate, chaotic torrent. She confessed everything, not out of a desire for truth, but as a frantic attempt to distance herself from a sinking ship. She painted Rick as a monstrous manipulator, a puppet master who had pulled her strings. But with every detail she provided, every scheme she outlined, she only succeeded in highlighting her own willing and enthusiastic participation. She had not been a pawn. She had been the queen, eager for her share of the spoils. Her confession was a monument to her own ambition, now curdled into pure terror. Rick's interrogation was a different kind of performance. He sat opposite Agent Chen, radiating defiance. He had Arthur Sterling by his side within the hour, and his initial strategy was one of pure belligerence. "This is a farce," Rick spat, leaning forward. "My wife, my unstable and vindictive ex-wife, orchestrates a hostile and illegal corporate seizure, manufactures evidence, and you treat it as credible. This will be thrown out of court before a jury is even selected." Agent Chen remained placid. "There was no illegal seizure, Mr. Thompson. Every move Ms. Martin made was meticulously legal. She used the provisions of corporate law provisions your own lawyers likely drafted to protect a marital asset from being devalued by criminal activity." He slid a single document across the table. It was the final signed resolution from the board of the Delaware Shell Corporation, formally transferring ownership of Nightingale Holdings to Martin Strategic Solutions. "She didn't steal it, Mr. Thompson. She simply claimed what was already hers. You were running your criminal enterprise out of her property." Rick stared at the document. The sterile legal language was a death sentence. It was in that moment that the full scope of his defeat crashed down upon him. He hadn't just been caught, he had been conquered. He had been beaten at his own game, outplayed on his own field, by the one person he had never even considered a player. His fury momentarily gave way to a look of stark, hollowed-out disbelief. Arthur Sterling fought valiantly in the pre-trial hearings. He argued that Celine's actions constituted entrapment, that the evidence was fruit of a poisonous tree. In a packed courtroom, he thundered Ms. Martin created a trap and lured Ms. Rossi into it. This is not justice. It is a vendetta executed with the resources of the federal government. The assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp young prosecutor who had worked with Kate Martin, calmly dismantled his argument piece by piece. "Your Honor, Ms. Martin did not create the crime. She merely illuminated it. The conspiracy to defraud investors and bribe officials was already in full motion, orchestrated by Mr. Thompson and Miss Rossi. Ms. Martin simply changed the name on the door. The gift Mr. Thompson offered Ms. Rossi was an offer to join a criminal conspiracy. Her acceptance of that gift was her final self-incriminating act. This wasn't entrapment. It was a reckoning." The judge agreed. All of Sterling's motions were dismissed. The case would proceed to trial with the full weight of Celine's evidence behind it. The public unraveling was spectacular. News channels played montages of the fallout Senator Corrigan's chief of staff, face, hidden behind a newspaper being hustled into a black sedan by federal agents. Panicked brokers on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange as TIV, the ticker symbol for Thompson Innovations, was permanently delisted. An interview with a retired teacher who had lost his pension investing in Rick's company, his face a portrait of betrayal. The empire built on whispers and lies collapsed in a roar of public disgrace. The trial itself was almost an anticlimax. The prosecution presented an avalanche of undeniable evidence. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. In the end, Richard Thompson stood before the judge, stripped of his bespoke suits and his aura of invincibility. He was just a man in ill-fitting courtroom attire, his face a mask of cold fury. When asked if he had anything to say, he simply said no. The judge, decrying his staggering arrogance and the profound damage he had inflicted, sentenced him to 25 years in a federal penitentiary. Isabella Rossi, weeping openly, received a lesser sentence of 7 years for her cooperation. "I lost myself," she whispered to the court. But as she was led away, the hollow look in her eyes suggested she knew the truth. She hadn't lost herself. She had simply been her truest self, and it had led her to ruin. And Celine. She fulfilled her side of the bargain. From a secure, undisclosed location, she gave her testimony via a live video link. Her face was obscured, her voice digitally altered, transforming her into an anonymous, disembodied instrument of justice. Calmly, precisely, and without a trace of emotion, she walked the prosecution through the intricate web of deceit she had untangled. She was a ghost in the machine to the very end. With her immunity secured, she vanished. But a new force quietly emerged. Business journals began reporting on a new, highly capitalized firm, Martin Strategic Solutions. It had acquired the core patent for the algorithm that had once been the jewel of Thompson Innovations. The company's mysterious CEO was a Caroline May, a name no one recognized but whose strategy was bold and whose commitment to ethical practices was unwavering. In a sun-drenched house perched on the cliffs of Carmel by the sea, Celine, now legally and spiritually, Caroline May, watched her new life take root. She ran her company not with Rick's manic, predatory energy, but with a quiet, focused intensity. The house was filled with light books and the scent of sea salt and cypress. It was a home, not a showcase. She was building something real on a foundation of truth. One evening, as the sun melted into the Pacific, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and gold, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Kate. Kate. Just saw the evening news. They showed him being transferred to the federal penitentiary. He looked so small. "You did it, Elle. You actually did it." Celine read the message, a slow, genuine smile gracing her lips. It wasn't a smile of triumph or revenge. It was the quiet, profound smile of a survivor. She thought of the woman who had lived in the gilded cage, the woman who had been diminished daily, the woman who had almost disappeared entirely. To save herself, she'd had to become a strategist, a hunter as ruthless in her own way as the man she had brought down. There was a cost to it, a hardening of the soul she would carry forever. But as she looked out at the endless open ocean, she knew it was a price she had been willing to pay. This peace wasn't an absence of conflict. It was a hard-won territory, a state of grace she had claimed for herself. She was not a ghost. She was the architect of her own resurrection. Celine's story is a chilling reminder that in the high-stakes theater of family drama and corporate greed, the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. She didn't just get mad, she got strategic. She transformed her pain into a plan, her vulnerability into a weapon, and proved that the ultimate victory isn't about revenge, but about reclaiming your life and rewriting your own ending. What do you think? Was Celine a hero, or was her intricate plan just as ruthless as the man she took down? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of cunning betrayal and ultimate justice captivated you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a good real-life drama, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories you won't want to miss. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for listening.